Hello friends, and welcome to the Integrated Dharma program. My name is Andrew Olensky, and I would like to invite you to join us in this course about to begin called Deepening Wisdom. It's the third in a three-part series, a year-long program that looks at the classical Buddhist teachings about living with integrity, developing the mind through meditation, and now culminating in this third phase, deepening wisdom. What is wisdom? How are the Buddhists using these terms? And how do we understand the core insights of the Buddhist tradition? I invite you to come and look at the first lesson. The course is organized in a way that presents two texts every week for 16 weeks. It's a significant body of material. But these texts are all quite brief, usually just one page. They've been very carefully selected to sort of extract from the many different texts we have there the core teachings, the most important nuggets, if you will, of various parts of the Dharma. In each case, I've presented them, as you can see in the sample course, sort of carefully listed side by side, the English and the Pali original, so you can see what words are being used and how they're being used. And then I give some commentary, both on the importance of the English and how the particular text fits in with other parts of the course or other teachings, or bringing out some of the most salient features of it. It has a commentary on the Pali for those who are interested, exactly why some of the key words are translated the way they are and what some of the linguistic components of them are that can help us understand their meaning. And then importantly, there are two other sections, one called Investigation, which is offering guidelines of how we can look at these teachings as a living investigation to see how they mean what they do in our own lives, in our own experience, in our own world. And also a section on practice, how to bring these teachings into our own practice of meditation, of ethics, of wisdom. The Buddhist teachings were always meant to be lived. They were meant to be embodied. They are meant to be engaged with. These were not just philosophical teachings or interesting psychological insights. They offer really a whole program of inhabiting a new and different and quite valuable way of looking at the world, way of looking at ourselves. And in this section on deepening wisdom, we're really getting down into the heart of the Buddhist teachings about what things in the world are most valuable to understand, and how these understandings, how the understanding of these things can be deeply transformative of how we approach our lives, how we live our lives, and how we understand ourselves. So just to give you some brief tour of the program and where it goes, it begins with looking at wisdom in general, some general remarks about it, where the Buddha points out that it's something that grows gradually, that over time, that it's dependent upon various conditions, such as good company, hearing the teachings, careful investigation of the teachings, but again, quite importantly, the actual practice of these teachings. Not however we feel like it, but according to the instructions that were given in the teachings of how to practice. So that's one of the valuable parts of this program, is that it really gives us access as closely as reasonably possible to the teachings of the historical Buddha himself. This isn't distilled through multiple centuries of other traditions and languages. It's not necessarily filtered through the idiosyncrasies of various lineages and teachers. All valuable stuff, of course. But for those of you who are really interested in getting back to the source, to look at the horse's mouth, so to speak, this course is working entirely from the teachings found in the Pali Canon that are the earliest recorded versions of what the historical Buddha very likely said. After talking about wisdom generally, we're going to start with right view, which is really where it begins, the first member of the Eightfold Path. That right view has to do with how we orient ourselves to everything else. It has to do with facing in the right direction before we can even begin walking on the path. It recognizes next that wisdom is largely a matter of subtraction as much as it is addition. I mean, yes, we have to add and gain certain insights into the way things are, but first, in order to do that, we really have to unload ourselves of various misperceptions, misconceptions, various delusions and illusions that we have. So there's a whole section on getting rid of abandoning obsessions and overcoming distortions. They speak specifically about how they're using those words. It involves recognizing the mind is always in flux. It's something that's moving and changing moment by moment. And orienting ourselves to the dynamic nature of reality is an important step in aligning ourselves for wisdom. Then there's insight into the stream of consciousness. We look at Sariputta's text where he talks about seeing states one by one as they arise and are present and then pass away. And we realize from our own practice we can see this for ourselves anytime we close our eyes and look. That the mind is actually a flow of events. It's not a thing that exists. And that sets ourselves up for some important insights. The Buddha then has some passages that we're extracting that talk about attachment and feeling tones, and how, our pursuit of pleasure and avoidance of pain as a reflex that's deeply embedded in us is itself an obstacle to seeing things clearly. We project our wishes onto things and our fears and so forth. And so sort of neutralizing that is important. And recognizing how much of what determines our understanding of things is driven by the unconscious, by underlying tendencies, attitudes and habits and ideas and beliefs that have developed over time that are largely unexamined. So we're going to look at the role those play. And then really zooming in on one of the core insights of non-attachment. That basically when we hold on to things, we distort them in some important way. When we let go of things, we're able to see them more naturally as they are. So the importance of sort of not always having the mind congeal around what it's most familiar with in terms of how it thinks about things and responds to things, but sort of loosening up, if you will, some of the dynamics of our own minds in order to see more clearly. Then we're going to get into that most challenging and most central of Buddhist teachings on interdependent origination. It doesn't just mean that everything is connected to everything. It means something more subtle than this, that things arise and fall in constellations, in interrelated relationships, very specifically, moment by moment, having to do with key aspects of our own mind and body, key aspects of the immediate environment, and how every moment is really a new creation, a new world, a new birth, if you will, that immediately passes away and vanishes. So again, understanding how things come up together, relying upon, depending upon, conditioned by one another, and how they then fall apart only to set the foundation for how they're going to arise again in the next moment. We're going to look at that with some closeness. And along with this understanding of conditionality comes a sort of middle teaching of, in between sort of thinking that everything exists or that nothing exists, that there's a middle way, that things are kind of existing and not existing at the same time. That is to say, they're occurring, but they're not leaving any indelible underlying substance. And that goes into understanding consciousness itself as a conditioned event. There's some teachings in later Buddhism that talk about consciousness in a more universal, more substantial way. But in early Buddhism, consciousness is as ephemeral, as changing, as transient and conditioned as anything else in the world, anything else in experience. And so we're going to look at the teachings about that, which of course leads directly into probably the most central and the most enigmatic of all the Buddhist teachings, which is non-self. What do they mean by that? What do they mean by non-self? Again, as we're going to see, it has less to do with a sort of metaphysical principle, denial of the entity of non-self, and more to do with, taking a certain attitude towards experience. We can construe what we're seeing and hearing and thinking and feeling as belonging to me, consisting of me, or not. This is happening, definitely. I'm fully aware of it, but it's not necessarily personal. It's not mine. My thoughts are not necessarily my thoughts. My breath is not my breath. So being able to see things are happening interdependently without automatically and consistently and relentlessly rooting it in the me to whom it's happening or the I that is possessing it. That's a subtle but important shift in our thinking, in our way of relating to things. And we're going to see how exactly he talks about that and how he helps us move through that idea and understand it. One way of understanding it is through various metaphors. Nice stories, the metaphor of the chariot or the sticks in the forest and so forth. There's a lot of interesting ways he has to help us get at this idea of non-self. And then as we sort of get into the more esoteric, more sort of end game of Buddhist awakening, we take on the notion of disenchantment, of sort of waking up from a set of illusions, from a dream, from some spell that we're under, of thinking things are a certain way, and really learning to see them quite differently. And how once that spell of sort of enchantment is broken, then the sort of root compulsions of desire and craving and clinging are uprooted, are softened. We can temporarily at first, and then more reliably later on, extricate ourselves from certain automatic assumptions that we have about ourselves and the world. We're able to start thinking outside the box, if you will, to use a modern metaphor, and get free of some of the constraints that our unconscious mind puts upon our conscious awareness. And then we're going to eventually, of course, wind up looking quite clearly and directly at what the Buddhists mean by awakening. What is enlightenment? What is nirvana? I mean, there's so many ideas about it, so many different conceptions. We're going to look at what exactly the Buddha himself said about awakening. And it might surprise you, some of the things he says. It might turn out that it's something more accessible than we think, something more valuable than we think, and that it is something that we can actually understand, both conceptually and aspire to even experientially. Perhaps not to become awakened beings, never to crave again, but certainly we can learn to cultivate the conditions that will allow moments of awakening, moments of experience that are unencumbered by the afflictions of greed, hatred, and delusion. It's an attainable goal, and these texts are going to lead us towards how to look at that and how to practice that. And then finally, we're just going to end with a picture of what it looks like to be an awakened person. We'll look at some of the poetry, some of the expressions used by the Buddha to describe his state of mind and by others to describe similar states of mind. So that's a tour, if you will, of the territory ahead. I hope you decide to join us. The program is really designed for self-study. It's a tool for you to use to explore this material in a guided and helpful way. But it's something that I would encourage you to do with others, you know, with a partner, or with a small group, or even a larger study group. This material is well suited for that kind of group study. Again, you'll be getting something in your inbox once a week for 16 weeks. And the idea is simply to read the material, which is not going to be very extensive, and then really reflect upon it, investigate it, practice it all week, you know, in every opportunity that you can think of. How do I see this working out in my family relations, in my relations with friends or colleagues at work? How do I see it reflected in the popular culture, in the media, and so forth? How can I use these ideas to help inform my own meditation practice, or, you know, going on retreats and so forth? There's a lot here to work with, and my goal is simply to present it to you, to extract it from some often difficult and challenging sources, to translate it in a way that's straightforward and unencumbered by certain literary devices and certain gender biases in the original and so forth, and really present it in a way that we can work with it. We can mull it over, we can probe it, we can investigate it, and we can see what the Buddha meant by wisdom. And I'm guessing that both we personally and our world generally will be better off with a little bit more wisdom in it. So I hope you join us, and be well. Thank you.